Are there marketing projects that you need done for your company, but you don't have enough time or people to help? Do you have a great business, but you're looking to scale? This episode is hosted by the founder of GetLeverage.com, Nick Sonnenberg. Leverage is the premier marketing platform that pairs you with a team of experts for any big or small project that you want to outsource. Mathematician, professor, and acclaimed venture capitalist Howard Morgan knows the ins and outs of the investment world. On this week's episode, get a peek into Howard's time as president at one of the most famous hedge funds in the world, Renaissance Capital. Also, learn how he became the very first investor for Uber and what Howard thinks are the next big opportunities in the bioinformatics space, which has become his primary focus of his later stage investment group, B Capital.
Well, I'm really excited for today's podcast. I'm sitting here in New York in a studio with Howard Morgan, and I asked to get in touch with you through our mutual friend Linda Kreitzman, who was my program director when I did the financial engineering program at Berkeley. And I've been interested to sit down and have a conversation with you because your background, most people know you just for first round capital. And I guess I've seen you on that show Silicon Valley as a cameo. So noticed that. But you have a super interesting background, not just in venture capital. Me coming from a high frequency trading background, Renaissance is obviously the most famous quant hedge fund out there, and I know you were involved with that. So on multiple, and now I quit finance, and now I'm doing startups and entrepreneurship. So you're one of the few people that kind of also is in both worlds of quantitative finance and venture capital. So really excited for you to be here, and thank you very much for being on the show.
You're very welcome.
So you have quite the background. You're one of the world's most famous investors. Renaissance, you were the president for 5 years. You started it basically.
Yeah, when Renaissance started, Jim was the CEO. I was the president for the first 7 years.
And I know that things are with Renaissance. It's kind of it's pretty secretive stuff. So I understand if we can't go too deep into certain things. But for you listening, Renaissance, literally, if you were in trading or in finance, that is really it's like going to Harvard, but even beyond Harvard. I mean, that place, you don't know what's going on behind the doors. All you hear is, the things like the rumors that you hear about Renaissance is to get hired at Renaissance, you literally have to be one of the most brilliant people in the world. You have to, what I've heard, and I'm curious to know I would like to go deeper into it, but what I've heard is you have to basically be a hardcore scientist and give a talk in front of a bunch of people about any topic, basically. Could be how a butterfly flies.
It's a very academic screening process. And the one thing that in the research part, because there are several parts to Renaissance now, but in the research part, the one thing that's key is that you have not known much about the markets.
Right. Super interesting. When most of the time when you want to hire someone, you try to go and hire someone with a lot of years of experience in that field. So it's really, I'd like to learn more about what it's like there and the thinking process at Renaissance. But then beyond Renaissance, you're the typical PhD in operations research.
Correct.
You're a mathematician. You were a professor. And now you're one of the most famous venture capitalists. You started First Round Capital
with Josh Koppelman, yep.
And now you also are involved with a new fund called B Capital.
B Capital Group. It's a later stage fund with Raj Ganguly, Eduardo Saverin, and partnering with BCG, the Boston Consulting Group.
Awesome. So lots to talk about today. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to start kind of in chronological order a bit. So with Renaissance, how did you meet Jim?
So I was a professor, as you mentioned, at Cornell and then at Caltech and then at the University of Pennsylvania. And when I was at Penn, I spent a summer at the Rand Corporation as a consultant. And one of the people there, Peter Wiener, wanted to start a company and got the first commercial license for Unix. This is back in 1977. And Peter said he wanted to start this company. I said, that sounds like a good idea. I would try to help him. And he said he had a guy to fund it, which was another professor named Jim Simons that he'd known from Princeton. So that's how I first met Jim. Jim was funding Interactive Systems Corp., which eventually got sold to Kodak and then Sun. It's kind of the basis for AIX and Solaris and all those things. And Jim and I hit it off. I decided I was going to go back and continue teaching, which I did for the next few years at staying at Penn, where I was both in the Wharton School and the Moore School of Engineering, and took a sabbatical year at Harvard Business School. But Jim in 1981 called me up and he said, would you like to do some tech investing with me? And I said, sure. And so we started doing a little bit of tech investing, some listed markets and some private markets. And in 82, he said, you know what, why don't you take a leave of absence? I'll take a leave of absence. He was at Stony Brook. And we'll start this thing, Renaissance. I want to call it Renaissance. And that's what we did.
Why Renaissance?
Well, it was for him a rebirth, I think, a renaissance in the way he was going to run his life. He had a operation in Stony Brook, Monometrics as it was called, which was doing some of the quant trading, but had relatively limited capacity.
And was the vision at that time to build it into what it is now, or when you both quit to go and start Renaissance, was there kind of a different vision that then morphed into kind of what it is today?
I think it morphed. Initially, we had $70 million. 35 was in venture. 35 was in quant. And I focused on the venture, helping a little bit here and there in the quant. He focused on the quant, helping in the venture. And the idea was to see how they could both grow in capacity. Because at the time, the capacity of the strategies they were using, which were mostly in the futures and currency markets, was at that $35 million level. 7 years later, we looked at things, and the venture had done a 25% IRR, and which was top decile venture.
IRR is internal rate of return.
Internal rate of return is one of the measures. But as Jim said, it'll take us 3 to 5 years to get liquid. Mm-hmm. And by 1989, the machine that Jim had always hoped for, which was basically a machine that would do the trading almost on its own, without real human intervention in any of the algo decisions, and at scale was able to handle $1 billion. And that's when the Medallion Fund started officially. And so he said, and we're doing 38% after fees that are particularly high for the industry. And so we should separate the venture out because we want to make the Renaissance a pure play model shop.
Right. And Sharpe ratio is something that you're clearly looking at, and you don't want to mix the two strategies. Sharpe ratio is return adjusted for risk, and it's one of the key measures that hedge funds are benchmarking performance by. So $70 million back in 1981, I mean, that's quite a bit of money, even in today's terms, no less back in 1981. How did you go about raising that kind of money back then?
Well, the money was raised because Monometrics started out with $2 million, and the trading operations generated pretty awesome returns. So it went from $2 million to $70 million between 1978 and 1982.
Wow. And how did you guys do? I'm guessing you probably made a killing, but during the 87 crash, how did you guys perform?
It was very interesting. Jim and I were in Tokyo when the crash actually occurred.
I used to trade in Tokyo.
Yeah. Well, we were there for a venture actually thing. And my wife woke me up at 3 a.m. and said, you got to see what's going on in the markets. And Jim had been similarly woken up. And as I recall, the Medallion Fund lost $10 million on that day and made 20 the next. So, the models worked. I mean, it was, but it was a pretty sharp hit at that point.
Wow. And were you involved at all or collaborating with Rubenstein, who were Leland and O'Brien?
No, not really. Not really.
On Barra, they were doing the portfolio insurance stuff. There was nothing with that.
Nothing like that.
Gotcha. And Jim, so it was the two of you that started it?
Yep.
At the same time?
When we started, it was the two of us and an assistant, and then Mark Silber as our chief administrative officer was number 4. He's still there.
And he's a very famous mathematician, isn't he? Isn't there some theorems that he's created?
Jim is deservedly a very famous mathematician. He created the Chern-Simons gauge theory, which is a basis for modern physics for string theory. And he won. He's a differential geometry expert, and he won the Cole medal, which is the sort of the world top medal for that. So yeah, he's quite a serious mathematician and remains so. He still spends a day a week doing mathematics.
Great. And so, are you involved still with Renaissance, or are you totally separated?
No, I'm totally separated from Renaissance. I on and off since 1990. I've been a consultant on and off, but mostly separated. Although in 1990, I did keep my office next to Jim for the next decade doing venture, and he invested with me, and I invested my own money, and we did a lot of ventures during the 90s.
Do you have money still, though, in the fund, or that's
actually, right now I don't. I normally do, but right now I don't. In the Medallion Fund, all the investors, all the outside non-Renaissance employees were pushed out over time because the Medallion Fund investment it still has a limited capacity. I don't know if it's 5 or 6 or 7 billion, but it's very relatively limited, and it's used as part of the compensation. And so over time, first all of the outsiders were pushed out, and then a few of us stayed in, and so on. And then eventually they needed it, and it was fine. I think it was the right choice. But then I invested in the REIF Fund and the RIF Fund and so on.
And what are those?
The Renaissance Institutional Equities Fund, which is meant to be a fund for people looking at really long-term investments. And again, it shows you how people's perceptions differ. When that was marketed, it was marketed as a fund for insurance companies. It was going to do 400 basis points better than the S&P with half the beta, which is a measure of the risk, over 30 years. And it would be uncorrelated during that period. And that's what we told people. We said, this is a long-term investment. Don't look at it quarterly. It's a long-term investment. And they raised quite a bit of money in the first couple of years, $20+ billion, 26, 28 billion. And then there was a year where the S&P was way up and REIF was down. And the money flew out. I think 18 billion went out the door. And they said, no, this is well within the limits of the models. And here we are, I think 12, 14 years later, and it's about 500 basis points above the S&P with half the beta, just as they promised. Mm-hmm. The people who stayed in for the whole ride got exactly what they expected. The people who got out at the first sign of trouble deserved it.
So what is it about Renaissance that makes it that you can share with us? Obviously, you can't share too much secret sauce. But what is it that makes Renaissance so different, so much more successful than competitors? Is it that just every different step of every process is just a bit tighter? Is it that you're completely looking at things in a totally different way and you flipped it on its head?
I think it is discipline, heavily disciplined, number one. It's not a system if people intervene. That's number one. Number two is it has a chief scientist who determines what goes into the model, and that's altered every month. There are new signals added, signals removed, and that's number two. But I think, in fact, one of the big pieces of their secret sauce is they have data going back to the 70s. And people who've come into the business, in the quant business in the last 8 years, have been in a one-way market. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden their models stop working when something goes wrong. Renaissance models go way back. And they have a lot of respect for processing power. Back in the late 90s, Renaissance had more processors per employee than Google. So they really do understand what you can do with simulation and computing power and are very disciplined about that.
What's the hiring process like there?
I don't know what it is today. But basically, as you point out, for most people, it is giving a seminar just the way you would if you were going to be hired as a new professor at a university. You go and give a talk to the professors, and they snipe at you and ask questions and see whether you can defend what you've said and whether it's accurate and whether you know your stuff. They're looking for people who are, in fact, very intelligent, and they're looking for people who have a thirst for new knowledge and who are willing to do that in an environment which is a very collegial environment. It's not where you have 20 portfolio managers, each one on his own measure and trying to fight with everyone else. It's where everyone gets a piece of the whole pie.
I would imagine also that one thing that was always difficult when I was a trader was documenting research and previous strategies that are easy to access and learn from for the future, because maybe the strategy didn't work, but maybe there's a component to it that was an interesting idea that you might want to pick apart. So I'm guessing that you probably also had a robust repository of ideas and strategies that was accessible and easy to navigate through.
I think they have some of that, but really the key is the gigantic amount of data that they can backtest any new idea on, and the constant search for more data. Because as Jim once said to me, somebody said, would you rather have a fantastic new algorithm or a new source of data?
Right.
And The data for sure. It's not, they don't want non-public data. They want data that everyone else has, but they just want to use it better.
Yeah. You could use Foursquare check-in data for how many people are going to McDonald's in Brazil or,
for example,
or, looking at satellite imagery of ships coming in and out of ports and use that as data points, right?
Yep.
The world has gone pretty crazy with all the different signals you can be using.
Alternative data is the term of art.
How similar, have you read the book Principles by Ray Dalio?
I've read the book, yeah.
Is there any overlap with how you guys ran Renaissance and how he runs Bridgewater?
I think it's a much calmer environment. I don't think you don't get people screaming at each other and yelling at each other and the constant testing that Ray does. It works for Ray and it works for the people at Bridgewater if they last there more than a year. But no, Renaissance is a much more like a college campus.
Cool. So people have kind of the space to go and do research and think about topics that they want and encourage their genius.
Right. But as I said, I'm not, I haven't been inside Renaissance for quite a while.
Have you? So you moved from Renaissance to being a full starting first round. Is that the first thing that you started? No, had some other.
I left Renaissance in 1990, and I became what today would be called a super angel. So I was angel investing from 1990 to 2004, which is when first round started. But I did help start a number of companies in that period, including Idealab, which itself started about a couple of hundred companies. So I've spent a lot of my effort in that venture space from 1990 through 2004, when somebody who I'd worked with, Josh Koppelman, who I had funded at Infonautics, his first company, and then Half.com, his second company, realized that the time was ripe for a seed stage venture fund.
Why did you make the decision to leave Renaissance to be a super angel and take your own path?
Well, we were separating out the venture, which Jim wanted to do, and he was willing to invest with me, and he did, not as a formal fund because I didn't really want to run a fund. I had money too, and so I just made the decision to stay there and find new ventures. I really enjoyed. My real skill is nurturing and helping nurture people with good ideas, whether it's graduate students, whether it's entrepreneurs. Whether it was the Jim and the Renaissance team. And that's what I love doing, and venture lets me do that more often. Very, very cool.
So in your experience being a super angel and then starting first round and just being so deep in the VC space, when you work with companies where you're investing and then you're working alongside the entrepreneurs, are there any elements of kind of what you learned at Renaissance or what was working at Renaissance that you were trying to advise people to kind of move towards? Or
well, the one thing I would say, and this is certainly part of the mantra both at First Round and at Idealab, is measure everything. And you can improve it if you can measure it. You can measure the improvement, and so we measure everything. The Idealab mantra is sense and respond. Try something, see how it works, measure that, respond by making it better, and looking for local and hopefully global optima. In my OR terms.
It's so funny you say that. So I run a company called Leverage. We're basically this extension of your team, and it's a curated Upwork. We give you all these freelancers, designers, developers, marketers, and on demand you could just use as much or as little as you want at a flat hourly rate. And a lot of people give us tasks, do LinkedIn ads or do Facebook ads, and they might not even have email capture on their website, and they for sure don't have a dashboard of analytics. So I always tell clients, look, before you have us, before you throw money at us doing ads for you, how about we at least create you a dashboard so you can kind of see where you're at, so you can measure the performance and the impact and see if it's worth your while. But no one is looking, at least my clients, no one is taking data seriously.
No, we take it very seriously, and we make all of our first round companies and now the B Capital companies I'm involved with take it very seriously. Because if you can measure it and you start measuring it, you can improve it. And that's what works.
Well, not only that too, I've created dashboards for each department in the company so they could do their jobs more efficiently. So account managers can see the clients that have the highest probability of canceling or the highest probability of wanting to upgrade their subscription. Or other departments have other key metrics and data that they should be looking at. But it's a great way too to kind of automate out a lot of the managerial work by giving analytics and dashboards to the team members.
Absolutely. You provide the KPIs and the managers can work towards them. And some of the KPIs, most of them are quantitative, but there are some, if you look at the OKR methodology, the objectives and key results methodology that John Doerr talks about, and it's been used heavily at Google and other places, you can also take some of the more subjective things and still measure performance on those subjective items.
Yeah. I mean, we're just going through the process of doing OKRs for our next quarter planning now. But in terms of methodology for planning, I guess at the end, you just want everyone to be clear kind of what's a long-term goal and what are the short-term goals and what should you be measuring to roll up. And, you know, you have OKRs and then there's EOS system where they say the word rocks. Is there a system that when you're investing with startups and you're giving them advice, is there a system that you say, hey, this is probably the best practice for how you should be doing long-term planning?
Not really. I mean, we do try to push OKRs in once they're a year or two old, but if they're day one, it's too early for an OKR kind of thing. What we mostly try to help them focus on is meeting schedules. And if they have scheduled tasks, make sure that they stay on that. Or if they're behind schedule, they know why.
Gotcha. Remote teams. So my company Leverage, we're fully remote. And this is becoming a more and more popular topic nowadays. And I know a few years ago, investors weren't super excited to be investing in remote teams. Is that right?
I think some weren't. We've always had remote teams. Some great success stories. One of my PhD students back when I was a professor, a guy named Mike Zisman, who ended up being president of Lotus and senior VP at IBM. And when he semi-retired, he started a company called Golf Genius to do scheduling of golf outings for people, which has grown. And when he started it, he decided he needed an integer programming algorithm written. So he went on Elance and some kid in Romania wrote it for him for $300, right? And so he hired the kid and then he slowly built the company up. And until last year, they had no office. Even though they're doing millions of dollars in revenue. They had people in Bulgaria, in Romania, in England, all over the U.S. Michael's in the Philadelphia suburbs. And they met every morning on Skype and now Zoom. And that's how they built the company. Slice.com, which does pizza ordering, is something I've invested in with Wiley Cirilli, one of the first round entrepreneurs.
I've heard of that company.
Yeah. Well, they have, I don't know what the current number is, but several hundred people in Macedonia. Basically the entire computer science graduating class of the University of Macedonia, or at least the top half of the class. And the fact is they do a great job. Most of the people over there have learned English at some point, some variant of it, and they're able to do the programming that needs to be done. So, we're big on having remote teams, but they do take a certain kind of management.
Right. So all things being equal, are you indifferent, or has it even shifted where you have a preference for remote teams at this point?
From the cost point of view, there's a preference, obviously. From the is everyone on one team point of view, having people in the same place can help. But take B Capital. We have offices in Singapore, LA, San Francisco, and New York. And we get on a investment committee meeting call every Monday night at 5 p.m. LA time, 8 p.m. New York time, 8 a.m. Singapore time. And the whole the whole investment team is on Zoom, looking at each other, talking to each other. It works really well. So that I think today it's almost preferred if you want to be a multinational or a global company to have a reasonable amount of the people outside of the headquarters.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it can be challenging, but there's so much technology available now with Slack and Zoom and Asana and all these different tools that if you use them in the right way efficiently, and we're big about asynchronous communication at my company too. So we're sending a lot of video as well, so people still get the face-to-face interaction, but then you don't have to deal with the scheduling component.
Yep.
I think that it could increase productivity so long as you are using technology in smart ways and you have the right people in place.
Asana is one that the people at First Round have used very effectively, so that we create procedures for things, because we do a lot of dinners and salons and lunches and meetups and all things for the First Round community. And by building the methodology in Asana, it's let us bring new people in very quickly, be up to speed, and in terms of what do they have to do. I'm doing a lunch in New York for 20 people. What do I do? And then the Asana, you go to Asana and it's all laid out there.
That's where you're documenting your internal process. Yeah. My new book coming out is called Come Up for Air, How Your Team Can Leverage Systems and Tools to Stop Drowning in Work. Yep. And what I found in my company and then looking at other companies is most people don't understand how to think about different types of tools, and they're using communication tools to project manage or project management tools to communicate. And most companies aren't documenting anything. We're really big about, and I took this from the high frequency trading days because I used to have to take 2-week block leave, and I was forced to document how my algorithms worked and how my books traded.
Yep.
And so what we've done at Leverage is document everything. There's tools for documenting processes. We love Process Street. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of that company?
I've heard of it. I haven't used it.
Great company. My friend Vinay runs that. But it's a place where you could document processes as opposed to wikis, which would be Confluence, like static versus dynamic type of stuff. But using those things effectively has totally changed the company. We rotate positions and stress test the processes to make sure that there's no bottlenecks in the company. So now it's 2004. You're starting first round capital. I took a look at the companies you've invested in. There's some pretty impressive ones on there. Is there one in particular that was most exciting?
You know, I love all my children equally, right? Yeah. I mean, look, clearly our biggest success has been Stumble Upon. And I say that in a funny way because we invested in this kid in Calgary, Garrett Camp, with a product called Stumble Upon.
Garrett Camp from Uber?
Well, Garrett Camp from Stumble Upon, and we moved him from Calgary to San Francisco. And Stumble was doing very well, and we sold it to eBay. We made quite a lot of money in that. It was a very, very good sale. And we sold Garrett. Look, whenever he left eBay, we'd give him a desk and some money to start whatever he was starting next. So about a year later, he left eBay and moved into our office. We gave him some money and said, whatever it is, we're in. We trust you as an entrepreneur. And he said, it's called Uber Cab, and we're gonna help the San Francisco taxi situation. It's really awful to get a cab in San Francisco. Wow. And 3 months later, he brought in Travis and some other people. Ryan Graves was with him at the beginning, and that was Uber. They were in our office for 4 to 6 months.
Wow. So you were literally the first investor in Uber.
My partner, Roz Hayes, literally, we were the first investor in Uber.
Well, that was a pretty good one.
Yeah, that was a pretty good one. But it was.
You could probably stop after that one.
But we did more companies with Garrett after that, and including Reserve, which got sold to Resi. So that's worked out pretty well. But we've had some other great companies. For example, we did a company called Invite Media, which was one of the first DSPs in advertising. Mm-hmm. And the founders of that, Nat Turner and Zach Weinberg, after they left Google, which had bought it, decided they wanted to do something with big data that was not advertising, but helping cure cancer. And they created Flatiron Health, again, in my office here, this time in New York, as opposed to San Fran, and because they were here. And they had 5 desks, and then they had 20 desks, and I kicked them out. But we sold that for $2 billion to Roche last year, and they're well on their way to helping the standard of care for cancer.
Wow. Yeah, I noticed that B Capital, it's heavily focused in the health industry, isn't it?
B Capital is focused on B2B in general, and health information technologies are a key part of that. And we have a company called Evidation Health, which does virtual clinical trials, which means instead of visiting a doctor once a month during this clinical trial of 1,000 or 1,200 white males, all of a sudden you can have 10,000 people who get a blood pressure cuff at home and take their blood pressure 4 times a day. So they're giving you 100 reports a month instead of 3 or 4. And it's a much cheaper solution for the pharmaceutical companies. So we're sort of revolutionizing the way clinical trials are done with that company.
It's amazing. It's super exciting to see what's going to happen in that space in the next few years.
Yeah, very much so. And that and when I was in college here at City College in New York, in my senior year, I got a fellowship to MIT in physics, and the mentor at the computer center where I was spending some time, this is 65, said, "What are you doing next year?" I said, "I'm going to MIT in physics." He said, "You don't want to do that." He said, "Don't you like these things, these computers?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You should go into computers. You got a lot of math, operations research." And I did that. And I was fortunate enough to have listened to him. When people ask me the same question today, I say genomics, bioinformatics, because that is on the verge of true revolution over the next decade. Between CRISPR Cas9 stuff and the bioinformatics world and what we're able to know about genomics, we're going to change the world.
So what are some of the things you think in the next 5 years in that field that we're going to be hearing about that are going to be some breakthroughs?
Well, for one thing, knowing which drugs are individually work right for you, because every person is different. And most drug trials have not been against a broad spectrum of population. And now one of the companies, which interesting enough was a first round investment that B Capital has done at a later stage and notable, tests drugs against your particular tumor. So they take a sample of your blood if you have a blood cancer, and they say which of these 1,500 drugs and which combination of them work against Bill's tumor versus Jane's tumor and versus this other guy's tumor, and they may be Asian, African American, Caucasian, all different ethnicities, and it turns out different medicines work differently for people. So that's super personalized medicine. That's one real key to it.
Well, actually, in my master's thesis at Berkeley, I used the example that alcohol by itself might not have a super high correlation to death, and neither might Vicodin, but the interaction between the two might, and looking at things in terms of how interactions happen rather than just isolating variables and looking at the individual correlation.
And that's something that machine learning technologies give us, the ability to look at a lot of degrees of freedom at the same time. And that's become very important, I think.
Is there a particular entrepreneur that sticks out that you have been most impressed with?
I mean, we've had a number of great entrepreneurs at First Round. So, Garrett,
you love all your children equally.
Yeah, no, it's not that. I mean, but it really is true. But we've seen some great people like Brett Hurt early on. Did Bizarre Voice, which was the early review site, and you just see people who really are good at being an entrepreneur. At Idealab, I hired Bob Briscoe at Cars Direct, and then built it into Internet Brands, which has been a real juggernaut. Just a superior manager and entrepreneur. So you see a lot of great people along the way.
Mm-hmm. You must maybe not so much now. You might have other people that are taking these pitches, but I'm guessing it must be in the thousands how many pitches you guys are getting at First Round or at B Capital, right?
First Round, I think, says 5,000 or 6,000 pitches a year. B Capital is about 4,000 pitches a year. Yeah.
What's the process for managing that many pitches? Are there some criteria which are some automatic no's that don't even hit a human?
We don't do it fully automated because you never know. But the fact is that almost always the ones we're investing in come through a warm introduction from somebody who knows somebody. Mm-hmm. A lot of them, things that come in over the transom just don't fit. I mean, B Capital, we do B2B. If you send me a new B2C startup, I'm going to say, no, it's, or the wrong stage. Or in that First Round, we see something that a B stage deal, First Round says that's not for us. It's too late. So yeah, there is a lot of that. So that filters out a big chunk. But then everything gets a look either by a partner or a senior associate at either of the firms. And
every single one. So of the 5,000, they're all getting looked at.
No. I say about 2,500 are filtered out because they just don't. They're the wrong stage. They're the wrong. There's something we don't invest in. But all the rest of them get a look. Now it may be a 2-minute look, or it may be a 20-minute look, or it may be a meeting. If somebody that I know well says you really ought to talk to this young girl, she's got a great idea, we'll talk to them.
Is there a software that you've built to manage that? Because that's quite a lot of applicants. So is there a particular software or process that you have to manage that?
First Round's built a very substantial system based around Salesforce and Trello to manage all of that. And we have 3 software engineers on staff at First Round.
That makes a lot of sense. I always thought that if for solving that problem, you either need to do something like that or kind of like hack an applicant tracking system. Almost. Have you tried?
That didn't work. We all, people start with spreadsheets. We started with some simple flat file databases that worked for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But eventually, we really honed our system, and it's important to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So, what made you decide to leave First Round to start B Capital?
Well, when I started First Round with Josh, I said to Josh that I was 60 years old. I'd give him a decade. I'd give him 10 years. So 8 years in, we started looking at how do you do generational transition at a fund that's effective. because we've seen a lot of venture funds have real problems in trying to get generational transition to happen. And there's a blog post I wrote about it at the time. But we decided that particularly at the seed stage, you want to bring younger people in because their entrepreneurs tend to be, not always, younger. And the best entrepreneurs, I just saw a recent study that says they're in their 30s, some of the top companies. I mean, again, you get the outliers, right? And it's like saying, I want to drop out of college. And we say, yeah, why? And they say, well, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Michael Dell. We say, good, name the next 50.
Yeah, exactly.
and they can't. So but the fact is that that we know that you want to be around the young entrepreneurs, and that means you're out at 9 p.m. at night in the places where they're frequenting, whether they're bars or meetups or whatever. And at 70, I didn't think I wanted to do that, right? And we knew that. So we decided to create a path for people to make room for the new generation of partners, and that was what I did. At that same time, the people at B Capital, Raj Ganguly and Eduardo, Raj knew me, and he said, I'd love to have you do something. We're thinking about doing something later stage that won't conflict with First Round, because I still spend some of my time with First Round. I still have an office there. I try to help mentor and bring, if there's deal flow that's appropriate, I bring it there. So I didn't want to do another seed fund. I got dozens of, would you be my partner in my new seed fund? No, sorry about that. But this was global, which First Round is almost all U.S. and Canada. And it was B2B, which I always loved. And as a professor in the 70s and early 80s, I was doing a lot of consulting for the giant companies. And throughout the late 90s, throughout the late 2000s, I've been on John Deere's global advisory boards and understood how big companies really work and how they can benefit from interacting with new companies. Mm-hmm. So that pitch attracted me. And what they wanted me to do, which I'm doing at B Capital as chairman, was not so much sitting on the investment committee and passing on investments, was to figure out the culture and process for the firm. How do we make a firm that's a great firm globally that acts as one firm, the way First Round, even though it's in New York, San Francisco, and Philadelphia, acts as one firm? And how do we make sure that the processes are right to capture information about, are we doing things correctly, if you will, or what can we improve? The whole measure what matters, and we measure everything at First Round and we measure everything at B Capital.
So how are you spending your time nowadays? You have your hand in quite a few different jars here. So how do you manage your time and allocate time?
Well, first of all, as my wife says, to retire you have to tire, then you can retire. I haven't tired yet. So I spend about 25% of my time with B Capital, about 10% with First Round. Then I spend another 25% on my family office, where we've seeded a number of quant funds in the last 2 years. It's an area I'm still very interested in. And then there's a bunch of philanthropy things that I'm involved with, including Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories, and I'm now a trustee at Cornell University and things like that.
Are you involved with the Cornell campus?
I'm involved with the Cornell Tech campus as well. But I also sponsor the Zahn Accelerator at City College, which is huge amount of diversity in entrepreneurship when you look at the City College student body and the great things that are happening there.
Very cool. Back to the startups that you've seen, because you've seen just so many. What are some patterns? Obviously, there's a million reasons why people succeed and fail, but are there some just common patterns that you've identified?
Well, I think that to be successful, I have my mantra is the 6 Ps. People, which is you want to really people who have high integrity and high intelligence and a great work ethic. So people, product, or market, you want a giant market, because whatever product you have in mind at the beginning, it's probably going to have to morph a little bit when it meets the real marketplace. So you want a big market so that when it morphs, there's still a big market for it. Mm-hmm. Planning, do you have the sense to do and build plans and the ability to execute those plans? Profits, because we want to make sure that there'll be profits at the end of the road. That's why we're investing. And then the other two are really important. One is passion. Do you have passion for what you're doing? Because that's what you need to sell investors. That's what you need to sell customers, and what you need to sell employees, that you're recruits. And if you can't articulate that passion, if you can't do the storytelling, you're not going to be able to raise the next round, and that's going to be very important. And finally, persistence. When things get tough, are you going to stick with it, or are you going to run at the first sign of trouble?
Well, I guess that's related to passion. You can't. It's hard to have persistence if you don't have passion.
No, you have to have the passion first, but you may be passionate, but just not be the persistent type of person. You may say, "Yeah, this was a great idea. I really loved it, but the sales are slow this month. They haven't. The new product didn't take off the way I expected. We'll do something else."
Now, you mentioned one of the P's is profits. How important is profits when you're investing in early stage companies?
What's important is understanding the unit economics of what you're doing. You want to make sure that the unit economics can be positive.
Whether or not it is now.
Whether or not it is now, what is it going to take to get positive unit economics? Because without positive unit economics, you're never going to have a real company.
Or the other P is plan. So what's your plan to get those unit?
Well, that's part of it.
What's
obviously.
The plan to get the profits?
Right. I mean, the plans, of course, are mostly spreadsheets. And if we could translate those spreadsheets into reality, would be great. But they often don't.
And what's your view on valuations and the state of venture and the future of venture? I mean, you hear some crazy valuations now. Sometimes it's first-time founders with an idea, but they're able to build quite a lot of hype and get some crazy valuations. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to continue, or do you think that down the road, unless you are, an A-list entrepreneur with some previous exits, you're going to kind of need to have a bit more traction to get these valuations?
It's cyclical. I've been in this business, as you point out, since 1982, so that's 37 years. It's been cyclical. We saw bubbles in the 80s. We saw bubbles in the 90s, obviously a giant one. We saw bubbles in 2010. I think it's cyclical. Right now, their valuations are at a high.
Are we in a bubble right now?
We're in a bubble right now. I'm willing to say that. We are in a bubble right now. I think part of it is that
maybe I should raise money.
Well, if you do want to raise money, move to San Francisco because the valuations in the Bay Area are much higher. And it's basic economics, the supply and demand of capital. There's just too much capital that is pushed into the early stage. When we started First Round, we were investing $250,000 to $300,000 for 20% of companies. Okay, by the time we got to 2010, and we were the only seed fund. We were the first real seed fund. By the time we got to 2010 or so, valuations had gone up, and we had to put in more money or take less of the company. Today, I think the average check size is in the million range at First Round. And exits have not gone up commensurately. So if your entry price goes up by 3x and your exit price goes up by 1.5x, you're going to have your returns cut in half. And because venture is such a long game, the people who are putting money into the venture funds won't know that for a decade. And by the time they realize it, all of a sudden there'll be a crash in the venture in allocation to venture. And that's unfortunate, but I've seen it happen several times.
Good to know. So you're suggesting if you want to raise money, move to San Francisco, or just look for venture capitalists in San Francisco?
Move to San Francisco because the VCs there don't want you to be anywhere else, by and large. But that's if you want to raise at an outrageous price. If you want to raise with good advice and everything else, then you can stay wherever you are. We call it at B Capital the rise of the rest. I mean, and Steve Case says that. There's great venture being done everywhere. And as you pointed out earlier, you can have a company that's geographically spread. But where you're raising the money, there's the people who are raising the money, typically the CEO, CTO, then you want to be near capital sources. And that right now is Singapore, it's Mumbai and Bangalore, it's New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Boston. Little bits elsewhere, but those are the sort of concentrations.
Do you ever find companies where you love them, you love the product, you want to get involved, but it's in their best interest not to take money right now, and that it's a benefit to them to kind of have the constraint of not having capital so that it forces them to figure some things out?
I would say I'm trying to think of a specific example. I know that we see too many companies taking money, overpriced money, and not getting the help. The one thing that we built at First Round and that we're building at B Capital is a true organization, we call it the platform, to help the companies in grow, to help them with hiring, to help them with figuring out problems. First Round has the First Round network that does that really effectively. At B Capital, we have our own platform team plus the whole BCG consultancy that can do that. So if you just take dumb money, you have to figure it all out for yourself, and you're more likely to make some mistakes that you shouldn't make.
We'd never raised money for leverage. It's something that I've always considered doing, but I've, at least for the first few years, looked at it as a benefit not taking money because it forced me to be really smart about where I invest resources because we didn't have kind of a reserve to tap into if a mistake was made. So,
well, I think it's great if you can bootstrap. I think if you look at Reid Hoffman's book on blitzscaling, I mean, there are some things that if you want to do them, you just have to raise lots of money. Mm-hmm. With Uber, Garrett said to me at one point, look, if I were running the company, we'd probably be successful in 6 cities. But with Travis and the way we decided to do it, we're successful in 700 cities. So there is a question of when you need money and when you don't, or what kind of company you'll end up with, depending on how much competition you might have and so on. Sometimes you have the luxury of spending 5 years doing it and then bootstrap by all means. Mm-hmm. Other times the idea is just too much in the wind and too many people are going to do it. And if you don't have the right capital, you may succeed, but you'll succeed on a much smaller scale.
Makes sense. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I would love to just wrap up and know what's on the horizon for you. What's not? You kind of ticked almost every box that anyone would imagine in 10 lifetimes. So what's next for you? And lastly, where could people find out more information about everything that you're up to?
Well, what's next, first of all, is that I'm focusing now a little bit on longevity. For obvious reasons, being 73 or 49 hex, as I prefer to think of it. But I want to live a long time. Or I think I saw a great quote from Dolly Parton yesterday. They asked her, what do you want people to think about you in 100 years? And she said, I want them to think, boy, she's good for her. She looks good for her age. Or as Woody Allen says, I don't want to be immortal through my works. I want to be immortal through not dying. Mm-hmm. It turns out there's a lot you can do with precision medicine and nutrition and exercise and all sorts of things to really affect your health span, the length of time you can be healthy, and to essentially reverse the biological aging. The number is going to be the number because that's when I was born, but the look at the blood markers and look at the body stuff.
The length of the telomeres is really what your age is.
Length of the telomeres. You can affect all of those things, and I think that revolution is also happening over the next 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, where can people find out more about you?
My own website just has very little on it. It's arcagroup.com, arcagroup.com, bcapgroup.com, firstround.com.
First Round Reviews is...
And the thing you should be reading if you are an entrepreneur is the First Round Review. You can subscribe to that for free. We think of it as the Harvard Business Review for startups with tactical advice, and it's firstround.com/review. And two or three things a week, and they're terrific. Everyone loves them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Nick.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leverage Podcast from GetLeverage.com. Please let us know what you think. Rate and subscribe on iTunes. Leverage is an on-demand outsourcing platform that helps small business owners and entrepreneurs scale their business. We have experts that can help set up marketing and sales funnels, your email marketing, podcasts, social media creation, paid media, and much more. Grow your business overnight with a team of experts you can trust to deliver. Accomplish more. Visit GetLeverage.com.